All right. Hey, everybody. Ken Gouchi back here with you on the Veterans Angle podcast. It's been several weeks already, man. It sure is tricky to keep up on this when you got other stuff going on, especially when you got all kinds of people out there commenting and critiquing and all that kind of stuff. It's just hard to stay motivated with this. On top of all that, I had a whole bunch of stuff written down on this episode I was going to do. This week's episode is going to be on Islam, right? My last episode, I talked a lot. Well, I talked entirely about the the Jesus hoax. Mary Magdalene. And the bloodline of Jesus that came up through the Merovingians and eventually became Knight Templars and then Freemasons and so on and so forth. But there's a few things about Islam that the average person does not know, and that's kind of what this video is going to be about. So hopefully it won't be as long as the last one. But I had a whole bunch of information written down about this, and now for some reason I can't find it. I don't know. Maybe I didn't save it or something. But I mean, man, I did like freaking like 4 days worth of writing and all kinds of stuff. But it is what it is. I don't know what's going on with the lighting on this camera, man. For some reason, it makes this side of my face look all gray and this side look all dark, but that's not how it is. I don't know what's going on with my lighting. It almost looks like it's black and white, but I'll have to mess with my settings here. But anyway, it's still important for me to put this information out there just because, again, my purpose is not to create a new religion by any means. My purpose is to end religion, right? And that's what I truly feel Jesus was trying to do as well. I truly feel like he was not here to create a new religion. I truly feel like he was here uh, to end religion. He was specifically against organized religion. But it's very funny how, you know, really since the creation of Christianity in 325 AD, I tell people this all the time. Christianity was not invented until 325 AD, right? That's when Constantine created Christianity. Prior to that, there was no such thing as a Christian, right? They were all either Gnostics or Coptics or different Jewish sects, but there was no such thing as a Christian, right? Um, and obviously, when they translated the first Bible into Greek, that's when they came up with the name Jesus, right? Jesus, the God, Jesus, right? That's what it means. But most people never put two and two together, right? A man named Jesus Christ never existed, right? Obviously, the man's name was Yeshua, and so there's no way to really build upon that and explain the other religions out there if a person can't comprehend that. I say it every day that if you are unable to understand the purpose of religion, then you are incapable of understanding anything else about it. And this is proven through the battles that we've had, the wars and the chaos that competing religions have had with each other for thousands of years, right? Before the Christian and Muslims started fighting each other, it was the Christians against Jews, right? And again, they weren't called Christians; they were just called Coptics or Gnostics, right? Everybody thinks that Jews were such a fun-loving, peaceful group of people, but they obviously didn't have any religious tolerance, right? Because they killed Jesus for being insurrectionists against Judaism, right? So that's the reason. So they were not a bunch of fun-loving, freedom of religion-loving people. They wanted their system, and anybody who challenged that was met with the sword. And this is what religion does. It doesn't matter what religion you're talking about. This is what religion does. And the reason why is because the two greatest competitive sports ever created are religion and politics. And they play hand in hand off each other because it's all based off of moral values, right? And I tried to explain many years ago to one of my co-hosts that there is no set moral code in the world. every religion has like the basic 10 commandments, right? Like every religion, every group, every society that's ever existed has said, okay, it's wrong to kill, it's wrong to rape, it's wrong to rob, it's wrong to do certain things. But on top of that, there's actually cultures out there. Most people don't realize this. There's still a culture, that Ik tribe out of Africa, where it is actually an honor to kill somebody. So, in order for a man to be considered a man in the Ik tribe, they have to actually commit murder, and they have to murder an opposing tribal member. It's kind of like a gang affiliation, really. But that's what I actually attribute it to is religion, and all it is a large fraternity, right? It's just a group of like-minded people that band together for protection so that they can have a social network of like-minded followers, like-minded. It's a pack mentality, right? Herd mentality. And this is how humans are designed. And so when we start looking at all of these different religions and the way that they've kind of split and the way that some others have come together and done this and done that, I'll take Christianity and Judaism, for example. Now, obviously, when Constantine created Christianity, he took a whole bunch of pre-existing deities, like Horus and Mithras, and he took their stories, and then, he added some Judaism in there, right? He added some, Judaism, especially in particularly with things like the concept of hell, right? The concept of hell really didn't exist prior to, there was some Sumerian stuff, some Zoroastrian stuff that had to deal with, the devil and the underworld and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, Isis and Osiris, right? Isis was the god of the underworld when Osiris was able to resurrect him, right? And then they had Horus. But that's the point, is that Christianity is literally just a bunch of different religions that Constantine took. He cherry-picked little bits and pieces that he thought would create the best system, and that's what he did. And it took about 1,000 years for it to work its kinks out, right? Most people think that Christianity has always been like some peaceful, but that's absolutely not true, especially in the beginning days. Christianity was probably the most brutal religion on earth. There were constant wars, there were constant, even it's kind of interesting because when I was a young soldier, I was fortunate enough to be stationed in Mainz, Germany, which just happens to be the hometown of Martin Luther. For everybody who has ever studied the Protestant movement or anything like that, right? Martin Luther is the guy who started all of that. And he started it in Mainz, Germany, at the Mainz Dome, the big cathedral church that's there in Mainz. And I've been there 100 times, studying, learning, But when we see how even Christian sects can separate and split and become mortal enemies, 1,000 years of the Dark Ages, some of it was due to the competition between Christianity and Judaism. Some of it was owed to the competition between Christianity and Islam once it was created, and I'm going to get to that here in a minute. But then a lot of it started just by Christianity separating. Here again, the Protestant Reformation, man, most people don't realize how brutal of a time period that actually was in Europe for most people who didn't have a choice, man. People were either forced into conversion or they were killed. And that's all there is to it. If you were a Catholic, you didn't even you wouldn't even tolerate Protestants, and vice versa. Where I lived is kind of funny because Mainz is they call it the Tri-City, right? It's Frankfurt, Mainz, and Wiesbaden. Those are the three cities right there on the Rhine River that kind of form the German triad. And to this day, right, almost all of Mainz is Protestant and almost all of Wiesbaden is Catholic. There's just a river that separates the two cities. And to this day, these people, nobody from Wiesbaden goes into Mainz and nobody from Mainz goes into Wiesbaden. Everybody will go to Frankfurt, right? Because Frankfurt's obviously a huge city and a major hub. Everybody will go there mostly for the airport and stuff like that. But nobody really socializes. Wiesbadeners don't socialize with Mainzers, and Mainzers don't socialize with Wiesbadeners because of the difference in a Christian religion. But again, this is how tribal humans really are. And that's what religion is. Religion is a control system. It's man-made, right? And that's the only proof that a person needs is being able to see there are 45,000 variations of Christianity alone now. 45,000. Now, let's get into Islam a little bit. So Islam to me is the most confused religion on this planet. So first of all, to start, the guy named Muhammad, there was never a guy named Muhammad, just like there was never a guy literally named Jesus Christ, right? The guy's name was Yeshua. And Muhammad, right, in Arabic, Muhammad, however you pronounce it, literally means the Messiah, right? The Savior, the Messiah. I've said that, and there's a bunch of videos on YouTube now that are out about this stuff, but this debate has been going on for 1,300 years. Okay? Muhammad, a man named Muhammad, never existed. He never lived. Okay? Because Muhammad, literal translation, means the Messiah or the chosen one, Christ, right? Jesus. So after Constantine named this guy Yeshua and transformed him into Jesus Christ, literally Jesus or the God in Greek, the Arabs picked up the same storyline of the Gnostics, right? Now keep in mind, if you remember from my last video, I explained very precisely that the original Gnostics and Coptics did not believe that Jesus was resurrected or that he was the Son of God. In fact, Jesus said it himself. We are all the sons of God because that's how Gnostics believe. So anyway, the story of the resurrection was not added for several hundred years to the Christian movement. Again, they weren't called Christians. Okay, they weren't called Christians until 325 AD. You will not find that word. You will not find the words Christian, Christianity, Jesus, Christ, or any of that in any text prior to 325 AD. Wesley Huff can argue this all he wants. It doesn't matter. The facts are the facts. You cannot find that name anywhere prior to 325 AD. So now that we know this, now we can kind of start piecing the rest of it together. Now, I am convinced, as I said in my last episode, right, the whole Catholic movement was basically an anti-Christ movement. It was basically an anti-God movement. And I say this every day too, right? I mean, the God of Christianity and the God of Islam and the God of Jews, it's all the same Abrahamic God, and that God is actually the devil who rules through fear and punishment. That is the exact opposite of what Jesus preached about, the man named Yeshua, right? That's the exact opposite of what he preached about. But as I explained in my last video, when Jesus got crucified and, Mary and Sophia and Sarah and Thomas ended up in France, and that's what started the Merovingian bloodline, we can see that in 325 AD, that's right around the same time that the Merovingians kind of started really getting into some decent power. That's also the time where Constantine started going to war with everybody who didn't get on board with his new Christian religion, right? So there's a direct correlation there between the Merovingians and the Romans kind of competing against each other. Now, as we know, the Merovingians had some, they had some division in their ranks. They had kind of like a separation. There was a couple of sons that went to war against each other. And so France, or the Franks, it was kind of a war-torn place for a long time. So not only did you have like the Romans trying to come in and conquer everybody, but you had like the Germanic tribes, and you had the Norsemen and all kinds of people that were coming down into mainland Europe and kind of trying to take on everybody, because it was really a competition for the survival of the fittest, really. But anyway, the Merovingians, when they tried to come back together, they tried to come back together almost exactly at the same time that the Quran appeared. And here's the funny thing about the Quran is that, again, a man named Muhammad never existed. He didn't write the Quran. I hate to tell Muslims this, and again, there's other videos that kind of explain this a lot better than I can. But the Quran is basically just a bunch of Christian and Jewish and Gnostic texts that were kind of added together. But the man named Muhammad, their prophet Muhammad, is literally Jesus. It's the same dude. What happened was that the Arabs, right, and here again, this is just how religions get formed and created. The Arabs had slightly different interpretations, but the Muslim, the Islamic movement started out as a Christian sect. In fact, the original Muslim coins had a picture of Muhammad carrying a cross. Okay, that means that Muhammad was literally Jesus. And here again, I mean, this is not something, this is shit that's been out there for 1,300 years. But anyway, nobody actually knows who wrote the Quran because the Quran is not a single story. The Quran, just like the Bible, it's a compilation of several different oral traditions and written texts that kind of came together, right? There's a lot of Dead Sea Scroll stuff in there. And there's a lot of Gnostic stuff in there that most people just can't comprehend because they never put two and two together. That Muhammad was actually Jesus, or the man you all know as Jesus, aka Yeshua, right? Now, the thing with it is, I believe personally, I believe that the Merovingian king named Clotaire, I believe that he actually started the Islamic movement as a non-Trinitarian Christian sect because, again, the Gnostics did not believe in the Trinity. The Gnostics did not believe that Jesus was resurrected. And that wasn't added to the story until several hundred years after Jesus died. But that's the point. The entire Quran is basically just, left out pieces of the parts that Constantine didn't want to add to the Bible. And that's basically what Islam is it's basically kind of it literally started out as a non-Trinitarian Christian sect. I believe personally that the Merovingian king Clotaire was responsible for writing the Quran, and I believe that he started that movement in the Arab world specifically to compete against Catholicism. Because again, during those times, Catholicism, Rome was trying to, they were always trying to interfere with France and England and all that stuff in those days. And again, the medieval times, literally the Dark Ages, was caused from Christian tyranny. It was not caused from any other tyranny, right? This is why, there's a 1,000-year time period where you don't really see a lot of the rest of the world's involvement. You really just, history kind of focuses on Asia. Right, there's little brief parts of it, like obviously, like the Mongolian raids into Eastern Europe and stuff like that. But by and large, most of the chaos that was happening in the world for that time period came from Christianity. It came from Rome trying to exert its power over everybody. And this is where you see all kinds of different groups starting to pop up. And this is where you see, just straight barbarianism as far as I'm concerned. But I believe that Clotaire, the Merovingian king, I believe that he actually started Islam as a direct competition with Catholicism, right? And here again, it's kind of interesting when you look at the timelines of everything, like how the Roman Empire started falling and how the Ottomans started kind of taking over. And then again, we get into like a little bit later time period with the Knight Templars, how they start fighting against Islam, right? Because what happened basically is Islam grew so fast and it got so strong so quickly that it started causing problems, right? It started talking about, man, we don't believe that this dude is resurrected. So what they did is they took the guy named Muhammad, who was originally the same guy as Jesus, and they just kind of morphed him into his own individual person. That's what Islam is. Okay, that's literally what it is. I call it a pre-Constantinian religion that followed suit with all of the original Coptics and Gnostics, where they did not believe that Jesus was resurrected. They did not believe that Jesus was the Son of God. And instead, they believed that he was just a really wise, smart guy that happened to know a few things about living peacefully. And isn't it interesting that, I try to, again, I had so many things written down about this, and I don't know where that file went to, but isn't it interesting that Muhammad supposedly had 12 wives? Yeah, that kind of sounds a lot like Jesus and his 12 disciples, doesn't it? I mean, look, there are so many connections, and I've said this 100 times, Arab Muslims are simply not smart enough to understand all this, and Christians are simply not brave enough to talk about it. Okay, so you've got two factors. You've got low IQ people, and I'm not being facetious here. Okay, Arabs are low IQ people. Okay, forget the Egyptians, forget the ancient Arabs who came up with freaking whatever astronomy or whatever they came up with. I'm just saying, Arabs by and large are a lower IQ people. Anyone around from around the equator is going to have a lower IQ from people from northern climates, right? This is just an environmental evolutionary thing that separates different groups of people. And the simple truth is that Arabs are very low IQ. They always have been. That doesn't mean that that's the exception to the rule. Obviously, there are some smart people in every race. But Arabs in particular are pretty low IQ on an average level across the board with all other races, right? The only group of people that has a lower IQ than Arabs is sub-Saharan black people. And I don't know why this offends so many people so much, but it's a fact. Okay, it's just a fact. It's not me being racist. It's me just saying facts. And that's the problem with Islam, is that the people who follow it aren't able to actually understand history well enough to realize that the religion, it started out as a Christian sect. Yet we have had 1,300 years now of straight chaos between Islam and Christianity, right? We could get into the Moor invasions into Southern Europe, like Sicily and Spain and shit like that. But if you understand history, you understand that these two religions have been fighting against each other since the very beginning. Now, I maintain that Islam is closer to the original teachings of Jesus than any other modern Christianity, with the exception of Mormons. And I'm going to get into that into my next video. That's not going to be today. I'm going to talk about that in my next video, right? Especially the connection between Mormonism and Freemasonry. And just different things like that. But at the end of the day, Islam is actually a closer religion to the original teachings of Yeshua, to the Gnostics and the Coptics. Islam is actually closer to that than modern day Christianity. Catholicism is a complete fucking hoax. I'm telling you all. Catholicism, every modern Christian religion that we have is based off of Catholicism. Again, I was fortunate enough to be stationed in the first place, Mainz, Germany, where Catholicism actually split into Protestantism, right? So Catholicism ruled for 1,000 years. Literally, it ruled for 1,000 years without a challenger, except for Islam, right? But when the Protestant Reformation came, that's when Christianity it took 45,000 variations of Christianity exist now. Okay, so I say this again and again. I'm not trying to ruin anybody's faith. Man, religion is an important thing. And I say it every day. I would much rather live in a Christian Judeo society than any other society out there. I agree with the moral codes the most. I mean, because it creates the happiest, most peaceful life, right? And that's what it's all about. It's all about trying to figure out ways to create peaceful societies. That's what religion does. But if you don't understand the purpose of religion, it is impossible for you to understand anything else about it. And this is where I say so many people, Muslims just aren't smart enough to understand this, and Christians aren't brave enough to understand this, because there is no greater competitive sport ever created than religion and politics. And humans will eventually get to a point where we will become intellectual enough, we will become smart enough where we will not need that fear of God to live good, happy, productive lives, right? But this is not going to happen for a long time. This is not going to happen for a long, long time. And until it does happen, there's going to be constant fighting and constant war because that's just the nature of what religion is. Religion is an ideology, and nobody likes being told that their ideology is wrong, right? So they're willing to fight and defend it because, in other words, they would have to admit that they're stupid, and people aren't willing to do that, right? So this is how you've got, thousands of years of war-torn countries, the entire Middle East, and, again, from a personal perspective, I understand it all. But that's just because I've done years of research and years of studying, and especially with my Masonic heritage and all this kind of stuff. It's just this stuff means more to me than the average person. That's the only reason it's ever interested me so much. But the average person doesn't care, and the average person doesn't need to care because, again, they have their support group, they have their fraternity, and that's all that religion is. Religion is just a large fraternity. Right? It has the same structure. It has the same hierarchy. It has the same membership process. Right? Everybody says, "Oh, well, you have to pay dues to a fraternity." Well, you got to pay dues to a religion too. It's called tithing. Right? And every religion has some form of it, even Islam. Um, it's just not complicated to understand some of this stuff if you really start connecting the dots. And like I said, wouldn't it be nice if Christians, I've said this so many times too, Christians, they're all fighting against each other, Protestants against Catholics, and Mormons against Jehovah's, and, Seventh-day Adventists against Lutherans. The last time I checked, and again, I'm not Christian, I was raised Christian, but the last time I checked, Christianity, there's only one important thing to belong to that faith. That is the belief that Jesus was born, that Jesus was crucified, and most importantly, that Jesus was resurrected for the remission of our sins. That is the basis for Christianity. Nothing else beyond that should matter. But yet Christians, here again, 45,000 variations of them because nobody wants to agree on anybody else's interpretation, right? So everybody's always trying to create the next biggest, best thing. And that's what I believe Islam was created. Again, I believe that Clotaire actually wrote the Quran, and I believe that it was created specifically to compete against the bullshit Catholic movement, which dominated the entire European continent at that point. I'd love for somebody to prove me wrong on this. I'd love for somebody to prove that Muhammad was a real man and he had 12 wives and each one of them had 83 kids. And, it's all a bunch of bullshit. But this is how societies are led, right? You get one charismatic guy that starts pushing a message, and before you know it, you've got entire religions that are formed and spawning off of this. I'm sure that when I get my book finished, my new book that I'm writing, I'm sure that it will spawn separate religions as well, even though I'm specifically making the point that I am not here to start a new religion. I am here to end religion. But I also admit that humans are not nearly smart enough for that to happen yet, and it's going to be quite a while before it does happen. I'd give Christianity about another, I don't know, 500 to 700 years. I would probably give Islam and Judaism about another, I don't know, 600 to 800 years. And I would give Hinduism and Buddhism about another 1,000 to 1,200 years. I think that those are going to be the two last remaining religions on earth, just based off of population alone. Obviously Asians make up 58% of the world's population. And even though Christianity has a pretty big impact on the Asian culture as well as Islam, right? There's entire countries now that are entire Asian countries, that are entirely Islamic now. but Buddhism and Hinduism are still the dominant religions in those regions, and I really do think that they will be the last remaining ones, just because they are more peaceful and more uh, easy to adapt to and live by, and that's kind of what I think. Again, religion is really just people that are looking for groups of like-minded people. It's no different than a fraternity. It really isn't, and this is what I wish the world could understand. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with believing in God. There's nothing. I believe in God. I just don't believe that Jesus was God, and I don't believe that Jesus was resurrected. But I absolutely believe in God, and I think that that's unfortunately, the average human is not capable of forming their own opinion on things. So they only follow what other people tell them to believe. And that's never going to change, right? I mean, that's just how humans are. Some humans are born to lead, a very small percentage. I'd say about 7% of the overall male population is born as an alpha male that's, naturally born leaders. But the rest of the mass majority of people out there, they are sheeple. They are sheep. They will follow their fake shepherds to their slaughter, because that's what sheep do. I don't know if anybody heard it in my last episode when I said that old African proverb. It's one of my favorite quotes, and I say it all the time. Right, the sheep spends his entire life fearing the wolf, only to be slaughtered and eaten by the shepherd. The shepherd spends his entire life convincing and controlling the sheep to fear the wolf, so that the shepherd can justify feeding his family, right? That's how he makes his living. He wouldn't be able to eat if it wasn't for the sheep, right? The wolf doesn't care, because he's a wolf, and he's going to do exactly what God put him here to do. Now, only the sheep. Now, I'm gonna kind of continue on with this little thing, because I'll tell you, if you don't understand that old African proverb, then it is impossible to understand God, right? And the point of that proverb is to illustrate that we all justify evil and sin in our own ways. What's any more sinful about the wolf feeding himself than the shepherd feeding himself? Why is that more evil? It's not. Okay. Again, that wolf is here to do exactly what God put him here to do. He doesn't question it. He doesn't need any other answers, because he knows his purpose. And his purpose is to thin the herd. His purpose is to take out the weak and the sick animals that can't defend themselves. Right? Believe it or not, the wolf actually makes the herd stronger, because every herd, every team is only as strong as its weakest link. So the wolf is actually put here as a biological process to keep this big rock spinning, because that's what has to happen. There has to be life, there has to be death, there has to be strength, there has to be weakness, right? That's just nature. But what most people don't realize is that wolf is not evil. The wolves, right? Everybody believes that wolves or dogs are man's best friend, right? That they have goodness to them. They have loyalty. They have strength. They have purity. Wolves don't lie. So why is it that the sheep have been convinced to fear the wolf? Again, the reason is so that the shepherd can justify feeding his family. Because if the shepherd was put on the same level as the wolf, saying, man, both animals are just trying to feed themselves, that would take away the fear, and the sheep wouldn't have to listen to the shepherd anymore. Do you see how that works? This is why the mass majority of people out there are sheep. And the lower IQ you have, this is why every religion on earth, right? I mean, especially, look at the Amish, man. Here again, another Christian sect. Look at the Amish. They don't believe in allowing their people to get above an 8th grade education, because they understand that education, intelligence, is what compels people to break away from organized religion, right? Because once you see it for the hoax that it is, and once you see it for the control mechanism that it is, you can never look at it the same again. Now, Islam, was created in a time where there were so many different people fighting each other. And, here again, the whole Middle East was up in, you had Jews and Romans and Egyptians and all kinds of other people that were just constantly clashing. And Islam started out as a social network, again, a non-Trinitarian Christian sect. Okay? It started out as a Gnostic movement that was created off of other things because they knew that Catholicism was a bunch of bullshit. They knew that Catholicism was a straight joke. So, I guess my point with this video is that there's a lot of things. Man, I had a whole bunch more stuff that I was going to talk about this. There's just so many interesting things about it. For example, remember in my last episode how I was talking about how the man you all know as Jesus, Yeshua, I believe that he had 4 wives. Mary Magdalene, Sophia, and then the other 2, I can't remember their names. But I do believe that one of those wives was Arab. And possibly either Palestinian or, that didn't really even exist back then, but, one of those groups of people. So probably like a Jordanian or a Syrian type, from that region. I do believe that one of Jesus's wives was an Arab woman. I really do. And whether she maintained her connection to Mary Magdalene and the Merovingian movement or not through their bloodlines, I don't know. But I would not be surprised to learn that they did. And I would not be surprised to learn that there is even a direct connection to Jesus himself with the actual Islamic creation. And it just didn't get pushed out until a couple of hundred years, until after Constantine basically started, collapsing the entire world with his forced religion. But if you all see the point, the point is that if Muslims would just admit that their dude is the same dude, and if Christians would just be brave enough to say, you people are stupid because we believe in the same fucking guy. If people were smart enough to do that, it would solve so many problems. But again, just look at the fighting, the infighting just amongst Christian religions themselves, right? Look at it again. The Mormons hate the Lutherans, and the Methodists hate the Baptists. It's like, oh my goodness, man, because everybody has forgotten that it's really only that one core principle that they're supposed to be bonded by, right? And that is the belief that Jesus was resurrected. Now, again, the majority of the world does not believe that. And the people who followed Jesus himself didn't believe that, right? The Coptics and the Gnostics, they did not believe that Jesus was resurrected. But again, this is why it's so important to understand basic history. Because if you don't understand the history of something, you're never going to be able to understand the rest of it. And I don't know what else I can personally say about this that's going to convince or influence anybody to even look into it. But I will tell you that it has to do with intelligence, man. It has to do with lack of not being afraid, right? That's what the fear of God does, is that it controls people, right? And that's why it's such a sin. I say it, no greater sin has ever been created than when men learned how to control other men through the fear of God. Right? No other sin has ever been as great as that until humans learned how to capitalize on that fear. That's the only sin that outdoes the original. And, whether you're looking at Christianity or Judaism or Islam or, Hinduism or any of them, they're all based off of controlling their society. No religion really has ever started out with the idea that humans should be free to do whatever they want to do and blah, blah, right? Every religion has its core. They all have basically the same 10 commandments, right? It's all wrong to kill and all that kind of stuff. But here again, it's based off of morality, right? Morality is subjective. And so that's what people don't understand, is they don't understand that what's right to you may not be right to me. That's because there is no such thing as good or evil. There is only positive versus negative, right? You cannot have love without hate. You cannot have, pain without pleasure. You cannot have happiness without sorrow, right? You can, it's the yin and yang. It's the laws of physics, really. It's the yin yang of the universe. You cannot have one without the other. And it goes even with good versus evil. This is why good versus evil doesn't exist, right? In order to believe in the Christian, Islamic, and Jewish God, first you have to believe that God was so powerful that he was able to create the heavens and the earth, right? No problem. We all can get on board with that idea. But then you would have to believe that God created evil specifically just to test us dumbass humans, right? So he created us in his image, but then he creates evil to test us. So in order to believe in these three religions, then you have to believe that somehow God lost control over that evil that he created. Okay, this is what separates Jews and Muslims. In order to be Christian, then you have to believe that not only did God create us, create evil, and then lose control of evil, but then you have to believe that God sent himself in the form of Jesus to save humans from that same evil that he created. It is truly the dumbest thing that anybody can ever believe in, but I digress. Whether you're Islamic, whether you're Jewish, whether you're Christian, it's all the same thing. It is all the same crap. It is designed to control, and it works great. It is a great social network. It is a great fraternity. People who belong to those groups are taken care of. Their lives are made easier by belonging to them. And that's the entire point of religion. Anyway, I hope you all get some useful knowledge out of this. My next video is going to be on Mormons, and specifically Joseph Smith and his Masonic connections, and kind of the whole thing about Mormonism and everything else. And I've got some interesting points that I'll try not to lose all my notes. But anyway, I hope you all learn something from this. And if I can influence just one person, I get asked all the time, like, man, why do you do this? Why do you think your opinion matters? My opinion doesn't matter. I don't care if anybody listens to me. I don't care if anybody agrees with me. My purpose is only one thing, and that is try to bring light to a world that is filled full of darkness. That is my only goal. And if I can influence one person to get out there and do their own research and start coming up with their own ideas. Here's the thing. Y'all got to remember that history is written by the victor, right? But there's always three sides to all stories. There's your side, there's my side, and then there's the truth. And this is why it's so important for people to be able to actually get out there and do their own research and come up with their own conclusions instead of listening to everybody else. I don't want you to listen to anything I'm telling you to do. I want you to go out there and prove me wrong. That's what I want you to do. And hopefully in that process, you'll learn some truths. Because again, only listening to my side or only listening to your side, that is not the truth. Right? This is why there's so many things that can be debated when it comes to world history, right? You get these apologists out there, like Wes Huff. I mean, he'll go on for hours and hours and hours about how Christianity was, it's 2,000 years old and the God's name is Jesus Christ and it's in this. It's like, no, dude, no, it doesn't exist. All that stuff that people think they've proven about it, it's all been fabricated. It's all just one side of the story, but nobody ever listens to the other side. And when they do, they don't compile both sides to create the truth. That's all I'm trying to get people to do. I'm trying to get people to look for truth. Religion is a great thing. It's a very important aspect to running a healthy, peaceful society. The problem with it is that when people begin to live in so much fear that they can't even function without it, that's a problem. But again, humans are a long way away from ever reaching a point where we're going to be smart enough to live without that fear of God. So this is just kind of a beginning process of me trying to help people get to that point. But make your own determinations, do your own research, and if anybody has something that they'd like to talk about that goes against this video, then let me know and let's talk. Till then, y'all take care.